Have you ever been accused of something so horrific, so unthinkable, that even your own reflection in the mirror becomes a stranger? Have you ever felt the weight of 1,000 eyes burning into your soul, judging you, condemning you, deciding your fate before you even open your mouth to defend yourself? Let me tell you what happened to me, to us, to our family. This is the story of how one terrible night turned our entire existence upside down, how everyone believed we were monsters, and how a single detail that almost everyone missed saved us from losing everything we held dear. I'm sharing this because I need you to understand that sometimes the truth is buried so deep beneath lies and assumptions that it takes a miracle to bring it to light. My name doesn't matter anymore because what happened to me could happen to anyone, and that terrifies me more than anything else. This is my truth, raw and unfiltered, and I'm trusting you with every painful detail because someone out there needs to hear this. Someone needs to know that when the whole world turns against you, when even your own neighbors look at you like you're evil incarnate, there's still hope if you refuse to give up. My hands are shaking as I write this, as I relive every moment. But I owe it to my child, to my family, and to every parent who has ever been wrongfully accused to tell this story exactly as it happened. It was a Tuesday evening in late September when our lives changed forever. The air had that crisp autumn quality that usually made me feel alive and grateful. But that night it carried something else. Something I couldn't name but could feel in my bones. My spouse and I had just finished dinner with our 7-year-old daughter, Emma. She was the light of our lives, a bright, curious child with her mother's eyes and my stubborn determination. We lived in a quiet, suburban neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, where kids played in the streets until the streetlights came on, where we never locked our doors because we felt safe. That sense of security was about to be shattered in the most devastating way possible. Emma had been unusually quiet during dinner, pushing her food around her plate instead of devouring it like she normally did. When I asked her if something was wrong, she just shook her head and said she was tired. Kids get tired, right? That's what I told myself. That's what any reasonable parent would think. But something in her eyes troubled me. A shadow that hadn't been there before. A distance that made my heart clench with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. My spouse noticed it too. We exchanged glances across the table, that silent communication that couples develop over years of marriage. Should we push? Should we let her rest? We decided to give her space, to let her come to us if something was bothering her. That decision would haunt me for months to come. After dinner, Emma said she wanted to take a bath and go to bed early. She loved her baths, usually spending at least half an hour playing with her rubber ducks and making elaborate stories about underwater kingdoms. But that night, she was in and out in 15 minutes. When she came to say goodnight, wrapped in her favorite purple towel with the hood that made her look like a little dragon, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a bruise on her upper arm, dark purple and roughly the size of an adult's fingers. My spouse saw it at the same moment I did. Our eyes met again, and this time the communication was different. This time there was fear. I knelt down to Emma's level, trying to keep my voice calm and gentle even though my heart was racing. I asked her how she got the bruise. She looked away, her lower lip trembling, and said she fell at school during recess. It was plausible. Kids fall all the time. They run and jump and tumble and come home with scraped knees and bruised elbows. But something about the way she said it, the way she wouldn't meet my eyes, made me press further. I asked her if she was sure, if anyone had hurt her. She burst into tears, said she didn't want to talk about it, and ran to her room. My spouse and I stood there in the hallway, frozen, not knowing what to do. Should we follow her? Should we call her school tomorrow? Should we take her to a doctor? We decided to let her calm down and try talking to her in the morning. We tucked her in, kissed her goodnight, and told her we loved her. She whispered that she loved us too, but her voice was so small, so broken, that it physically hurt to hear. That night, my spouse and I barely slept. We lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, whispering theories and concerns back and forth. Was she being bullied? Had another child hurt her? Was there something happening at school that we didn't know about? We replayed every interaction from the past few weeks, looking for signs we might have missed, clues that would explain the change in her behavior. She had been quieter lately, less enthusiastic about going to school, but we had attributed it to the adjustment of being in second grade, having more homework, facing new social dynamics. Now every small detail took on sinister significance. Why had she stopped wanting to go to her best friend's house? Why had she seemed nervous when we mentioned the upcoming parent-teacher conference? Why had she started having nightmares again after months of sleeping peacefully? The The questions swirled in my mind like a storm, each one leading to darker possibilities that I didn't want to consider. At some point in the early morning hours, I must have drifted off because I was awakened by the sound of Emma screaming. We both jumped out of bed and ran to her room, hearts pounding, expecting to find an intruder or some terrible accident. Instead, we found Emma in the middle of a nightmare, thrashing in her bed, crying and calling out for help. My spouse reached her first and tried to wake her gently, but Emma, still caught in the grip of whatever terror had invaded her dreams, struck out instinctively. Her small fist connected with my spouse's face, right below the eye. It wasn't a hard hit, not enough to cause serious damage, but it was enough to startle both of us. Emma woke up fully then, confused and disoriented, and when she realized what she had done, she started crying even harder, apologizing over and over. We held her, both of us, telling her it was okay, that it was just an accident, that nightmares can make us do things we don't mean to do. We stayed with her until she fell back asleep, her small body curled between us, her breathing finally evening out. I remember thinking that morning would bring answers, that we would figure this out together as a family, that whatever was troubling our daughter, we would face it head-on and overcome it. I had no idea that the nightmare was just beginning. The next morning started ordinarily enough. Emma seemed calmer, more like herself. She ate her breakfast and even smiled when I made a silly joke about her cereal forming a face in the bowl. My spouse had a slight bruise forming under their eye from where Emma had accidentally hit them during the nightmare, but we both agreed it was nothing to worry about. Kids have nightmares. Accidents happen. We were still concerned about the bruise on Emma's arm, so we decided that my spouse would call the school that morning to speak with her teacher and see if anything had happened during recess. I would take Emma to school, and we planned to schedule a doctor's appointment just to make sure everything was okay. It seemed like a reasonable plan, the kind of thing responsible parents do when they notice something off with their child. We had no way of knowing that these well-intentioned actions would be twisted into evidence against us, that every choice we made that morning would be scrutinized and judged and used to build a case that we were dangerous, abusive parents who needed to be separated from our child immediately. When I dropped Emma off at school, I gave her an extra long hug and told her to have a great day. She hugged me back tightly and whispered that she was sorry about last night. I told her there was nothing to be sorry for, that we loved her no matter what, and that we would always be there for her. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and then she turned and walked into the school building. I watched her go, feeling that familiar mixture of pride and melancholy that every parent feels when they watch their child grow more independent. I didn't know it would be the last time I would drop her off at school for months. I didn't know that within hours, our entire world would explode. My spouse called the school around 9 o'clock that morning and asked to speak with Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson. Mrs. Patterson was a veteran teacher, well-liked by students and parents alike, someone we had always trusted with our daughter's education and well-being. My spouse explained about the bruise on Emma's arm and asked if Mrs. Patterson had noticed anything unusual, if Emma had fallen during recess, or if there had been any incidents with other children. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then Mrs. Patterson said something that made my spouse's blood run cold. She said that she had actually been planning to call us that day because she had noticed some concerning changes in Emma's behavior over the past few weeks. Emma had become withdrawn, reluctant to participate in class activities, and had been spending recess alone instead of playing with her friends. Mrs. Patterson had tried to talk to Emma about it, but Emma had insisted everything was fine. However, that very morning, Emma had come to school with what appeared to be a fresh bruise under her eye, and when Mrs. Patterson asked about it, Emma had said she bumped into a door at home. Mrs. Patterson's voice took on a careful, professional tone as she explained that she was mandated by law to report any suspected child abuse, and that the bruise on Emma's arm combined with the new bruise on her face and the changes in her behavior had raised red flags. My spouse's voice was shaking as they tried to explain about the nightmare, about Emma accidentally hitting them and then somehow hurting herself in the confusion, but Mrs. Patterson had already made up her mind. She said she understood it must be difficult, but she had to follow protocol. She had already contacted Child Protective Services. The call was coming. The investigation was beginning. Our lives as we knew them were over. I was at work when my spouse called me, sobbing so hard I could barely understand the words. CPS was coming to the school. They wanted to interview Emma without us present. They were opening an investigation into allegations of child abuse. The words didn't make sense. They felt like they belonged to someone else's story, someone else's nightmare. I told my boss there was a family emergency and drove to the school so fast I'm lucky I didn't get pulled over. My spouse was already there, standing in the parking lot looking lost and terrified. We weren't allowed inside. We weren't allowed to see our daughter. A social worker named Jennifer Martinez came out to speak with us, her face professionally neutral, but her eyes already judging. She explained that they needed to conduct a forensic interview with Emma to determine what had been happening at home. She asked us directly if we had struck our child. The question felt like a physical blow. My spouse and I both answered at the same time, our voices overlapping in desperate denial. No, never. We would never hurt Emma. We tried to explain about the nightmare, about the accidental injuries, but Ms. Martinez held up her hand and said that Emma had told Mrs. Patterson she was afraid to go home. Those words broke something inside me. My child, my beautiful, precious child, was afraid to come home to us? How had things gotten so twisted? How had a nightmare and some unfortunate accidents turned into this? Ms. Martinez said they would need to examine Emma for any other injuries, that they would need to speak with her teachers, friends, and neighbors, that we should expect a home visit later that day. She suggested we contact an attorney. An attorney. The word hung in the air like a threat. We weren't criminals. We were parents trying to help our daughter through whatever was troubling her. But in that moment, standing in that school parking lot with other parents walking by and staring at us with undisguised suspicion, we realized that none of that mattered. We had been accused, and in cases of child abuse, the accusation itself is often treated as guilt until proven otherwise. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, panic, and mounting dread. We contacted a family law attorney who specialized in CPS cases, a woman named Sarah Chen who had been recommended by a friend. She listened to our story and then delivered more devastating news. Based on what we had told her, and given that Emma had visible bruises and had allegedly expressed fear of going home, there was a strong possibility that CPS would seek emergency custody. They could remove Emma from our home that very day, place her in foster care or with relatives, and we would have to fight through the court system to get her back. The process could take weeks or months. Sarah asked us detailed questions about the bruises, about Emma's behavior, about our parenting style, about whether we had ever used physical discipline. We answered honestly. No, we had never spanked Emma or used any form of physical punishment. We believed in timeouts and talking through problems. We were attentive parents who attended every school event, volunteered in her classroom, knew all her friends and their parents. We were, by every measure we could think of, good parents. But Sarah explained that in the current climate, with heightened awareness about child abuse and mandatory reporting laws, the system erred on the side of caution, which meant erring on the side of removing children first and asking questions later. She said she would try to be present for the home visit, but we needed to prepare ourselves for the possibility that Emma wouldn't be coming home with us that night. How do you prepare for something like that? How do you steel yourself against the possibility of having your child ripped away from you because of a misunderstanding, because of bad timing, because of a system that's designed to protect children but sometimes destroys innocent families in the process? The home visit happened at 4 o'clock that afternoon. Ms. Martinez arrived with another social worker, a police officer, and a woman who introduced herself as a forensic pediatrician. Sarah, our attorney, was there too, standing beside us like a shield against an army. They asked permission to enter our home, and even though Sarah whispered that we could refuse, that they would need a warrant, we let them in. We had nothing to hide. We wanted them to see that our home was safe, that Emma was loved, that this was all a terrible mistake. They walked through every room, taking photographs, opening drawers, looking in closets. They examined Emma's room with particular care, documenting her toys, her books, her artwork on the walls. They asked about the small dent in the wall near her bed, and we explained that Emma had accidentally kicked it during a particularly energetic jump from her bed to her beanbag chair months ago. We had been meaning to fix it but hadn't gotten around to it. They photographed it and wrote notes. Everything we said, every explanation we offered, seemed to be twisted into something sinister in their minds. The forensic pediatrician asked to see any medications in the house, any cleaning supplies, anything that could potentially be harmful to a child. We showed them everything, explained what each item was for, watched as they documented it all. Then Ms. Martinez sat us down at our own kitchen table and began asking questions. Tell us about your relationship with Emma. Describe a typical day. How do you discipline her? Has she ever made you angry? Have you ever lost your temper? The questions went on, each one feeling like an accusation disguised as an inquiry. My spouse started crying at one point, overwhelmed by the violation of our home and our privacy, by the implication that we were being interrogated like criminals. Sarah put a steadying hand on their shoulder and answered some of the questions for us, reminding Ms. Martinez that we were cooperating fully and that we had done nothing wrong. Then came the question we had been dreading. Ms. Martinez looked at us with those cold, professional eyes and said that based on the forensic interview with Emma, combined with the physical evidence of bruising and Emma's statements about being afraid to come home, they were recommending emergency removal. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. My spouse let out a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a scream. Sarah immediately objected, arguing that there was no imminent danger, that the injuries could be explained, that removing Emma would be traumatic for everyone involved. But Ms. Martinez was unmoved. She said that Emma had disclosed during her interview that she had been grabbed and hurt at home, that she had bruises that were consistent with manual restraint, and that she had expressed fear. Protocol required removal in such cases. Sarah demanded to know exactly what Emma had said, asked for copies of the interview recording, threatened to file motions and appeals, but it was all happening too fast. The police officer, who had been standing silently by the door, stepped forward and explained that Emma would be picked up from school and taken to a temporary foster home for the night. There would be a hearing within 72 hours where we could present our case. Until then, we were not to have any contact with Emma. No phone calls, no messages, nothing. We were being separated from our daughter, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. I remember falling to my knees on the kitchen floor, begging them to reconsider, promising that we would do anything, cooperate with any investigation, submit to any evaluation if they would just let Emma come home. My spouse was holding on to me, both of us breaking apart while strangers stood in our home and watched with detached professional concern. Sarah tried to comfort us, said we would fight this, said we would get Emma back, but her words felt hollow in the face of such overwhelming injustice. That night was the longest of my life. The house felt wrong without Emma in it. Too quiet, too empty, haunted by her absence. My spouse and I sat in her room, surrounded by her stuffed animals and drawings, trying to make sense of what had happened. We replayed every moment, every interaction, looking for where we had gone wrong, how we could have prevented this. We called family members to explain the situation, endured their shock and disbelief, their questions about how this could happen to us. Some were supportive, rallying around us with offers of help and character references. Others were clearly skeptical, their voices careful and measured, as if they were trying not to judge but couldn't help wondering if there was some truth to the allegations. That doubt in the voices of people who had known us for years was almost as painful as Emma's absence. We were being tried and convicted in the court of public opinion before we even had a chance to defend ourselves. I thought about Emma, wondered where she was, if she was scared, if she understood what was happening. Did she think we had abandoned her? Did she hate us? What had she told those social workers? What had happened to make her afraid of us? The questions tormented me through the sleepless night, each one more painful than the last. Have you ever felt so helpless that you literally couldn't function? Have you ever experienced the kind of pain that makes you question whether you can go on? That's where we were. Rock bottom doesn't begin to describe it. The next day, Sarah called with more information. She had received a copy of the forensic interview summary, and what she read made her cautiously optimistic. Emma had not accused us of hitting her or intentionally hurting her. Instead, she had described feeling scared at home recently because she had been having bad dreams and had accidentally hurt her mom during one of them. She said she was worried that she was bad because she had hurt her mom. She mentioned that her mom and dad had seemed worried and upset, and she thought it was because she was bad. The interviewer had asked about the bruises, and Emma had explained about falling at school and about bumping herself during her nightmare. But she had also said something that had been misinterpreted. When asked if anyone at home had grabbed her or hurt her, she had said yes, that sometimes when she was having a tantrum or about to do something dangerous, her parents would hold her arms to stop her. The interviewer had apparently focused on the word grabbed and the mention of holding her arms, interpreting it as evidence of physical abuse rather than normal parental restraint. Sarah explained that this was actually good news because it showed there was no allegation of intentional abuse, just a series of misunderstandings and miscommunications compounded by Emma's age and limited ability to articulate what was really troubling her. However, CPS was still taking the position that the bruises required investigation and that Emma's statements about being scared warranted temporary removal. The hearing was scheduled for the following day, and Sarah was preparing a comprehensive argument for Emma's immediate return. She needed us to provide character references, medical records showing Emma's history of minor injuries from normal childhood activities, photographs of our family life, anything that would demonstrate we were loving, capable parents who posed no threat to our daughter. We spent that entire day gathering evidence of our innocence. We contacted Emma's pediatrician, who provided records showing a normal, healthy child with occasional minor injuries consistent with an active lifestyle. We reached out to neighbors, friends, family members, anyone who could attest to our character and our relationship with Emma. The response was overwhelming. People wrote letters, offered to testify, shared stories about what they had witnessed of our family life. Emma's soccer coach wrote about how we never missed a game or practice, how Emma always ran to us with excitement, how she clearly adored us. Our next-door neighbor wrote about the sound of laughter that often came from our backyard, about the elaborate birthday parties we threw, about the time Emma had scraped her knee, and I had carried her home while she clung to me like I was her whole world. These testimonials were bittersweet. They reminded us of the life we had built, the family we had created, the love that was so evident to everyone who knew us. And they underscored how absurd and tragic this entire situation was. We also had to confront some uncomfortable truths during this process. We realized that we had been so focused on Emma's physical bruises that we hadn't adequately addressed what was really bothering her. She had been having nightmares and showing signs of anxiety for weeks, and instead of taking her to a therapist or really digging into what was wrong, we had taken a wait-and-see approach. We hadn't failed her in the way CPS believed, but we had failed her in a different way. We had missed the opportunity to help her work through whatever was troubling her before it escalated to this point. That realization was its own kind of pain, a guilt that would stay with us long after this crisis ended. The hearing was held in family court on a Thursday morning. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, less dramatic than what you see on television, but infinitely more terrifying because our lives hung in the balance. The judge was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, Judge Patricia Morrison, who had a reputation for being fair but firm. Sarah had warned us that Judge Morrison took child safety seriously and wouldn't hesitate to err on the side of caution if she had any doubts. CPS was represented by a county attorney who presented their case first. He painted a picture of concerned teachers noticing changes in a child's behavior, a child showing up to school with multiple bruises, a child expressing fear about going home, and parents who couldn't adequately explain the injuries. He showed photographs of Emma's bruises, blown up to poster size, making them look more dramatic and alarming than they had seemed in person. He played portions of Emma's forensic interview, carefully edited to emphasize the parts where she said she had been grabbed and was scared. Listening to my daughter's voice, hearing her confusion and fear, knowing that I couldn't comfort her or explain to her what was happening, was torture. My spouse was squeezing my hand so hard it hurt, both of us trying not to break down in the middle of the courtroom. The county attorney concluded by arguing that while the investigation was ongoing, Emma should remain in protective custody until they could be certain she would be safe at home. It sounded so reasonable when he said it, so logical and prudent. Protect the child first? Ask questions later. How could anyone argue against that? But we weren't abstract concepts. We were real people, a real family, being destroyed by good intentions and procedural caution. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood up with a thick folder of documents and began systematically dismantling the CPS case. She presented the full context of Emma's statements, showing how the edited portions played in court had created a false impression. She explained about the nightmare, about the accidental injury, about Emma's anxiety and guilt over having hurt her mother. She presented the character references, the pediatric records, the photographs of our family life. She called our neighbor to testify, and the woman described in tearful detail what she had observed of our family over the years. She called Emma's soccer coach, who spoke about our dedication and Emma's obvious love for us. She presented evidence that the bruise on Emma's arm was in a location and pattern consistent with a fall, not manual restraint. She argued that CPS had jumped to conclusions without conducting a thorough investigation, that they had traumatized a child by removing her from a loving home based on misinterpreted statements and circumstantial evidence. Sarah was magnificent, fierce and passionate and articulate, fighting for our family like it was her own. But the county attorney objected to several points, argued that the evidence was self-serving, suggested that abusive parents often appear normal to outsiders. He questioned whether our sudden collection of character references was genuine or orchestrated. He implied that we had coached Emma on what to say and that her nightmares might actually be a symptom of trauma from abuse. Every word felt like a knife twisting deeper into an already gaping wound. Have you ever watched someone try to convince others that you're a monster? Have you ever sat powerless while your life is dissected and judged by strangers? Comment below if you've ever felt that kind of helplessness, because I need to know I'm not alone in this experience. Judge Morrison listened to everything with an inscrutable expression, taking notes, occasionally asking questions. She requested to review the full forensic interview video, not just the excerpts presented by CPS. She asked pointed questions about why CPS hadn't conducted a more thorough investigation before removing Emma, why they hadn't interviewed us before making the removal decision, why they hadn't consulted with Emma's pediatrician or other professionals who knew our family. The county attorney had less confident answers to these questions, falling back on protocol and the need to act quickly in suspected abuse cases. Judge Morrison then asked a question that changed everything. She wanted to know what specific incident had prompted Emma to talk to her teacher in the first place. The county attorney admitted he didn't know, that Emma had apparently mentioned the bruise under her eye that morning, and Mrs. Patterson had noticed other concerning signs and made the report. Judge Morrison frowned and asked if anyone had actually verified when Emma received that particular bruise. There was an uncomfortable silence. The county attorney shuffled through his papers and said that Emma had told the forensic interviewer she bumped into a door at home the night before. Judge Morrison turned to Sarah and asked if we had any information about this. Sarah nodded and said we absolutely did. She explained that after Emma's nightmare and the accidental hit, Emma had been so upset and disoriented that she had gotten up to use the bathroom and, still half asleep, had walked into the doorframe. We had heard the bump, had gone to check on her, had put ice on it, and had planned to mention it to the school the next day to avoid exactly this kind of misunderstanding. But in the chaos of the CPS call that morning, we hadn't had the chance. Sarah presented photographs we had taken that night showing the minor swelling and the ice pack we had used. We had taken them simply because we photograph everything with Emma, documenting her childhood in thousands of digital images, but now those casual snapshots were evidence of our innocence. Judge Morrison studied the photographs with intense focus, comparing them to the images taken by CPS. She asked what time we had taken our photos, and the timestamp on the digital files showed they had been taken around 11:30 the night before. She asked about the nightmare, about Emma's state of mind, about how she had ended up walking into the door. We explained everything in detail, describing Emma's confusion and distress, our concern and comfort, the simple accident that had occurred in the dark hallway. Judge Morrison then did something unexpected. She said she wanted to review the school's incident reports from the past month to see if there was documentation of Emma's fall during recess. She ordered a brief recess while someone retrieved those records. The wait was excruciating. My spouse and I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, holding each other, praying that this judge would see the truth, that she would let us bring our baby home. Sarah cautioned us not to get our hopes up too high, that even if Judge Morrison was sympathetic, she might still order a more gradual reunification process with supervised visits and family therapy. But I could sense a shift in the judge's attitude, a skepticism about the CPS narrative that hadn't been there at the beginning of the hearing. When we were called back into the courtroom, Judge Morrison had several documents in front of her. She explained that the school nurse's records showed that Emma had indeed come to the nurse's office 3 days prior, complaining of arm pain after a fall during recess. The nurse had documented minor bruising and had sent a note home with Emma advising us to monitor the injury and apply ice if needed. We had never received that note. Emma must have lost it or forgotten to give it to us, which was not unusual for a 7-year-old. This documentation corroborated our account and provided an innocent explanation for the bruise that had started this entire nightmare. But Judge Morrison wasn't finished. She had also requested and received security camera footage from the school parking lot for the morning in question. She played the footage on a screen in the courtroom, and we watched as Emma got out of our car that morning, hugged me goodbye, and walked toward the school entrance. The footage clearly showed that Emma did not have a visible bruise under her eye when she arrived at school. The angle wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to establish that the bruise she had when Mrs. Patterson saw her a few hours later was either not present or not noticeable earlier. Judge Morrison asked the county attorney how this squared with the allegation that Emma had received the bruise at home the night before. He stammered something about lighting and camera quality, but it was a weak response and everyone knew it. Judge Morrison then turned to the CPS social workers present and asked if anyone had reviewed this footage before removing Emma from her home. Ms. Martinez admitted they had not, that they had relied on Mrs. Patterson's report and Emma's statements. Judge Morrison's expression hardened. She said that while she appreciated the difficult job CPS workers had and the importance of protecting children, this case demonstrated a failure to conduct due diligence before taking the extreme step of removing a child from her home. She noted that the evidence presented by the parents, combined with the school records and security footage, painted a very different picture than the one CPS had acted upon. She pointed out that Emma's statements, when taken in full context rather than in edited excerpts, did not actually allege abuse, but rather expressed a child's confusion and guilt about accidental injuries. She observed that the character references and pediatric records showed a family with no history of violence or concerning behavior. And she stated, in words that I will never forget, that sometimes the system designed to protect children ends up harming innocent families, and that appeared to be what had happened here. Judge Morrison ordered Emma's immediate return to our custody. She dismissed the emergency removal order and closed the CPS investigation with a finding of unsubstantiated allegations. She also ordered CPS to provide documentation of this outcome to Emma's school and to anyone else who had been informed of the investigation. She recommended that our family engage in voluntary counseling to help Emma work through her nightmares and anxiety, and to help all of us process the trauma of this experience. But she was clear that this was a recommendation, not a requirement, and that we were free to manage our family's well-being as we saw fit. The relief that flooded through me in that moment was indescribable. My spouse and I both burst into tears, holding on to each other and onto Sarah, who was crying too. We had won. We were getting our daughter back. The nightmare was over. Or so we thought. The county attorney asked Judge Morrison to reconsider, arguing that even if this specific incident was explained, there were still questions about Emma's behavior changes and anxiety that warranted monitoring. But Judge Morrison shut him down firmly, stating that anxiety and nightmares in children can stem from many sources and do not constitute evidence of abuse. She said that if CPS wanted to pursue the matter further, they would need to present actual evidence of abuse or neglect, not speculation and misinterpretation. She ordered Emma to be brought to the courthouse immediately so she could be reunited with us. The wait for her to arrive felt eternal. We paced the hallway, unable to sit still, unable to think about anything except seeing our little girl again. When she finally came through the doors, escorted by a different social worker, she looked small and scared and heartbreakingly vulnerable. But when she saw us, her face transformed. She ran to us, and we caught her in our arms, the three of us collapsing into a heap of tears and relief and love. Emma cried so hard she could barely breathe, saying over and over that she was sorry, that she didn't mean for this to happen, that she just wanted to come home. We told her none of this was her fault, that we loved her more than anything in the world, that we would never let anyone separate us again. She told us about the foster home, about how the people were nice but how scared she had been, how she hadn't understood why she couldn't come home, how she thought maybe we didn't want her anymore because she had hurt Mommy during her nightmare. Hearing her fears and confusion broke my heart all over again. This beautiful, innocent child had been traumatized not by us, but by the system that was supposed to protect her. She had spent 2 nights crying herself to sleep in a stranger's home, convinced she had done something terribly wrong, all because of a series of misunderstandings and a failure to investigate properly before acting. We held her for a long time in that courthouse hallway, not caring who saw us or what anyone thought. Our family had been torn apart and stitched back together, and we were going to hold on tight to each other and never take a single moment for granted again. Judge Morrison came out to speak with us before we left. She apologized for what we had been through, though she emphasized it wasn't her fault, but rather a systemic problem with how these cases are handled. She said she hoped we would consider filing a formal complaint about the handling of our case, so that procedures could be improved to prevent this from happening to other families. She also gently suggested that we follow up on her counseling recommendation, because Emma had clearly been dealing with something that triggered her nightmares and anxiety, and professional help might benefit everyone. The drive home felt surreal. Emma sat between us in the back seat, refusing to let go of our hands, chattering nervously about everything and nothing. When we pulled into our driveway and Emma saw her home again, she started crying with what looked like pure relief. We spent that entire day and night together, none of us willing to be apart for even a moment. We watched Emma's favorite movies, made her favorite foods, played her favorite games, and just existed together as a family. That night, when we tucked her into bed, she asked if she could sleep in our room. We said yes without hesitation, and she curled up between us, finally peaceful. As I lay there in the dark, listening to her soft breathing and feeling her small body pressed against mine, I thought about everything that had happened. I thought about how close we had come to losing her, how easily the truth could have been buried under assumptions and insufficient investigation, how many families might not be as lucky as we were to have Judge Morrison hear our case. And I thought about the one detail that had saved us. The security camera footage that proved Emma hadn't had that bruise when she arrived at school. Without that footage, without Judge Morrison's thoroughness and skepticism, without the school nurse's documentation, we might still be fighting to get our daughter back. We might have been labeled as child abusers, lost custody permanently, had our lives destroyed by lies we couldn't disprove. The thought still gives me nightmares. In the weeks that followed, we did take Judge Morrison's advice and found a wonderful child therapist for Emma. It turned out her nightmares and anxiety had been triggered by something completely unrelated to us. A classmate had been telling scary stories at school about monsters and people dying, and Emma's vivid imagination had latched onto these stories, creating nightmares that she couldn't shake. The therapist helped her work through these fears, taught her coping strategies, and helped us understand how to support her better. We also went through family therapy to process the trauma of our separation. Emma needed help understanding why she'd been taken away and reassurance that it wouldn't happen again. We needed help dealing with the anger and betrayal we felt toward the system, the school, and everyone who had been so quick to assume the worst about us. It took months before things felt normal again, before we could drop Emma at school without panic, before she could go to bed without anxiety, before we could trust that our family was truly safe. We also found out what had happened with the bruise under Emma's eye that had appeared at school. Through conversations with Emma and her teacher, we pieced together that she had been playing tetherball during morning recess and had been hit in the face when another child's swing went wild. It had happened about 2 hours after we dropped her off, which explained why it wasn't visible in the security footage. Emma had told the playground aide it was okay and hadn't thought to mention it to anyone else. When Mrs. Patterson saw it later and asked about it, Emma had said she bumped into a door at home, confusing the two separate incidents in her mind, and genuinely thinking the teacher was asking about the smaller bump from the night before. That simple confusion, that child's inability to accurately sequence and explain events, had nearly destroyed our family. We never received an apology from CPS. Ms. Martinez and the county attorney maintained they had acted appropriately given the information they had at the time. The school sent a formal letter acknowledging the unfortunate situation and the confusion about Emma's injuries, but stopped short of admitting any wrongdoing. Mrs. Patterson, to her credit, did apologize to us personally. She said she had genuinely been concerned about Emma and thought she was doing the right thing by reporting, but acknowledged she should have investigated more thoroughly and communicated with us before making the call to CPS. We appreciated her apology, though our relationship with her and with the school was forever changed. We couldn't look at these people the same way anymore. They had been so quick to believe we were capable of hurting our child, so ready to have her taken away, without ever giving us the benefit of the doubt or the opportunity to explain. The trust that had existed in our community was broken, and we weren't sure it could ever be fully repaired. Some neighbors avoided us after they learned what had happened, as if the mere accusation had tainted us somehow. Others were supportive but treated us with a kind of careful pity that was almost as bad as condemnation. We became known as that family that had CPS called on them, even though we had been cleared, even though Judge Morrison had found the allegations unsubstantiated. The stigma lingered like a shadow we couldn't escape, but we survived. We made it through because we had each other, because we refused to give up, because we fought for the truth and got lucky enough to have a judge who cared about finding it. I'm sharing this story because I want people to understand how easily this can happen. I want parents to know that taking your child to school with a bruise, even one from a legitimate accident, can trigger investigations that spiral out of control. I want teachers and mandatory reporters to understand the immense responsibility they have and the importance of thorough investigation before making accusations that can destroy families. I want CPS workers to remember that they're dealing with real people, real families, and that the power they wield should be used with extreme care and diligence. And I want people who hear about child abuse allegations to withhold judgment until all the facts are known, because sometimes the story is much more complicated than it appears on the surface. I also want other parents who might be going through something similar to know that you're not alone, that false accusations happen more often than people realize, and that there is hope even in the darkest moments. Document everything. Take photos, keep records, find a good attorney. Fight for your family with everything you have, and trust that the truth will come out if you persist. Looking back on that terrible period of our lives, I can see now that there were lessons hidden in the trauma. We learned to appreciate every ordinary moment with Emma in a way we never had before. We learned that the justice system can work when you have a judge who takes the time to dig for truth rather than relying on assumptions. We learned who our real friends were, who stood by us, and who disappeared when things got difficult. We learned that children are remarkably resilient, that Emma was able to bounce back from this experience faster than we did. We learned to be advocates, not just for our own family, but for others caught in similar situations. We've since connected with support groups for families affected by false abuse allegations, and the stories we've heard are heartbreaking. Families torn apart for months or years, parents who lose custody permanently because they can't afford good legal representation, or because they don't get a judge as fair as Judge Morrison. The system is broken in many ways, and while it exists to protect children, which is a noble goal, it needs serious reform to prevent the kind of injustice we experienced. Children need protection from real abuse. Absolutely. But they also need protection from being unnecessarily traumatized by removal from loving homes. The balance is delicate and difficult, but it's one we must strive for as a society. Emma is thriving now. She's in 4th grade, back to her happy, energetic self, with new friends and new interests. She still has occasional nightmares, but we know how to help her through them now. She's learned that accidents happen and that she's not bad or dangerous because of them. She knows that her parents will always fight for her, that our love is unconditional and unbreakable. And she knows her own strength, having survived an experience that would have broken many adults. We're proud of her resilience and grateful every single day that we got the chance to continue raising her. As for my spouse and I, we're different people now than we were before this happened. We're more cautious, more aware of how our actions might be perceived, more protective of Emma and of each other. We're also more compassionate toward others who face judgment and accusations, more willing to question official narratives and look for the full truth. And we're more committed than ever to being the best parents we can be, not because we fear another investigation, but because we know how precious and fragile this time with our daughter really is. Every morning when I watch her eat breakfast, every evening when I tuck her into bed, I remember those 2 nights when our house was empty, when I didn't know if I would ever get to do these simple parental tasks again. That memory keeps me grateful and present in a way I might never have been otherwise. So here we are, our family intact, our truth finally told. I want to know if this story resonated with you. Have you ever been falsely accused of something serious? Have you ever had to fight against a system that seemed determined to believe the worst about you? Have you ever experienced the terror of having your child taken away, or the relief of getting them back? Please share your experiences in the comments below because I think it's important that we talk about these things, that we break the silence and stigma around false accusations and unjust investigations. Understanding this content, really absorbing what can happen to any family at any time through no fault of their own, might help you or someone you know in the future. If this story touched your heart, if you felt any of the fear or relief or anger or hope that we felt, please leave a like on this video. Your support means everything and helps us reach more people who need to hear this message. And if you want to hear more true stories like this, stories about real people facing extraordinary challenges, please subscribe to My Truth Revealed Tales and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. This channel exists to share the truths that people don't always want to talk about, the difficult experiences that need to be brought into the light, so we can all learn and grow from them. Thank you for listening to my story, for taking the time to understand what we went through, and for being part of a community that values truth and justice. Remember that things are not always what they seem, that there are multiple sides to every story, and that sometimes the most important details are the ones that almost get overlooked. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and always fight for what's right, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. Your family is worth it. Your truth is worth it, and you are not alone.